Hey, everyone. Happy Tuesday to you. You know, it seems to be all the rage to have oligopolies all over, so why not the cloud? We've got that. We've got some great IBM analysis and introspections. And are you ready for Web 5? It's Techstrong, gang. Hey, everyone. Happy Tuesday to you. Welcome to Techstrong, gang. I'm Alan Schemmel, CEO, Editor-in-Chief at Techstrong, and this is our daily Get Your Day Started show, Techstrong, gang. We're joined, as usual, by some of our gang members. Remote today, we've got the two Stevens. One's with a V, one's with a PH. So I'll let you, well, only their hairdresser knows for sure. But first of all, let's start off with Stephen with the PH, Stephen Foskett. Stephen, of course, of Tech Field Day. How are you, Stephen? Welcome.
It's great to be here, Alan. Looking forward to some oligopoly instead of gerontocracy, I guess.
Can't have one without the other. Welcome, and I'm looking forward to your thoughts on that. And then Stephen with a V joining us from, I used to call it upstate New York, but if you're Mike Bizarre, it's not really upstate yet. Steve Dickens. Stephen, how are you?
I'm good. Let's just call me the less fancy Stephen.
Oh, okay. Less fancy.
We've got premium God tier Stephen, which is Mr. Foskett, obviously. And then I like to sort of come in a little bit lower down the rankings.
At the everyman. Stephen.
Yeah, the everyman Stephen. Yeah, I'll go with that.
All right, welcome. And then joining us here in studio to my immediate left is our Echo Insights analyst and reporter and editor, Bonnie Schneider. Hey, Bonnie, welcome.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks for being here. And then to Bonnie's left, my far left, he is the expert on all things upstate, downstate in New York, as well as the New York Yankees, and our chief content officer here at Techstrong, the one and only Mike Vizard.
That's a lot of responsibility.
Put a lot on your shoulders right there, especially the way the Yankees are playing. Anyway, we're going to jump into today's show. We've thrown around the word oligopoly now a few times, and well, we have oligarchies all over the world, it seems, but why not have it in our cloud providers? This is there's an argument for it. There's an argument against it. Risk versus rewards. Mike V, what do you think?
Well, we have an article on DevOps.com written by a fella named James Watts. And, he runs a web development company. And he was just positing the idea that this is a bad idea. And a lot of the things that go with that are basically, he was positing the notion that 2/3 of workloads are running on the three major clouds these days. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of price competition among the providers of those cloud services. It seems like, and I will go to Mr. Dickens for this, but it just doesn't seem like there's, in the core workloads, that there's a lot of differentiation in terms of what one cloud service provider charges versus another. And there are tons of other cloud service providers, including IBM and Oracle and a host of folks whose names most people don't know. And most of the workloads that we're running are pretty basic. So I guess, Mr. Dickens, we'll start with you, but what is your assessment of the state of competition in the cloud era?
Well, I mean, first off, I don't accept the premise that 2/3 of workloads are running in the three cloud providers. From what I'm looking at in some of the highly regulated industries, cloud penetration's as low as 5%. So if you look at the financial services organizations, it's already huge on-premise deployments. I think you can hold two truths to be true at the same time. HPE, Lenovo, Dell, all growing with hybrid cloud offerings. And you can have public cloud providers growing at the same time. Google reported earnings last week. Cloud revenue went from 8 billion to just over 10 billion on a quarterly basis. So I think you can hold multiple truths to be true at the same time. I think there is a concentration risk. We're seeing the European regulators focus on this with DORA. the Digital Operational Resilience Act. That's due to some of the concentration risk actually at a physical data center level. So yes, you might be able to have 3 public cloud providers, but if they're in the same Equinix data center on the outskirts of London, it really doesn't matter whether you've got cloud diversity. I think we saw some of the downstream impacts of this last Friday. Microsoft Azure, and we'll get the research note. I did a deep dive on this. Microsoft Azure had a 14-hour plus outage of the US Central region. 3 availability zones all went down at the same time. This is distinct from the CrowdStrike outage that happened at the same time. Good luck for Microsoft that it happened at the same time, because I think there would have been front page news. I spoke to numerous vendors who were without email for 14 hours, plus a whole bunch of services affected. So I think there's a lot of concerns here, but I think saying that 2/3 of workloads run in the public cloud, I'm not subscribing to that as a
I think what he's saying is 2/3 of the workloads that are in the cloud run on those 3 platforms, rather than saying
Then in cloud, not public. I'm sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, so which country? Because that's not true if you're in China, because Tencent and Alibaba have got a different regional profile. So there's a lot to unpack. Very easy to make high-level statements like that. Which sector? If you're a small startup with 100 people, then 100% of your workloads probably run in the public cloud. If you're a globally significant bank, probably 5% of your workloads run in the public cloud. So throwaway statements like that, which region first, which sector? If you're a defense contractor like Boeing or Lockheed Martin, I don't think you're running most of your workload in the public cloud yet. So there's a lot of nuance, I think, underneath headline statements like that. We all spend our time talking about the public cloud so much that we think after 18 years it's got 100% penetration. It absolutely does not.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one too, Stephen. I think that we can quibble with a report or a headline or something, but I think that what we can't quibble with is that there is incredible power that these cloud providers have, and that the 3 big cloud providers in the U.S. at least have a very large share of the U.S. market. And I think that there's an interesting counterintuitive aspect to this. And this is one of the things that I drew from this report. It's not just marketing power or sales power that's leading to this. In many ways, it is, I guess, what I would call feature power. In other words, Amazon, for example, is constantly adding new features, functions, capabilities to AWS. Those are very attractive to customers, whether they're modern web-scale startups or app developers, or more traditional enterprises. The same is true of Google and of Azure for sure. Azure has long been the darling of enterprise IT, simply because Microsoft has seemed so laser focused on providing enterprise grade services in Azure that are friendly and easy to implement for enterprise IT companies. Google is really leaning into this. We heard about this at their Cloud Field Day presentation that we hosted last month, where they spent a lot of the time talking about things that aren't all that, web scale, web 3, 4, 5 sexy, and are really sort of enterprise storage and networking and security features. But the counterintuitive thing here that happens is the more differentiated features these platforms add, the harder it is for customers to balance and get their workloads out. So it's not just pricing pressure. It's not just egress fees that are locking companies in. It's also features, because if I am going to embrace the coolest features of, let's say, Azure, well, then I really can't easily move that application to AWS, let alone Akamai or IBM or Oracle, or on-prem. It becomes much, much harder to do that as more features are added and as I embrace those features. On the flip side of that, if I want to resist the oligopoly, whoever that is in your region, whether that's Tencent or Azure, if I want to resist the oligopoly, I have to not use features that I would otherwise find attractive, that would accelerate my workloads, and that frankly make the whole thing more useful and productive and cost effective. So it really is a challenge to resist the draw of the oligopoly. And it's not, as I said, just about pricing.
Well, it's interesting for me. There's a natural tension. I mean, you look at what Kubernetes as an orchestration layer. I think this kind of encapsulates the point that you're making. You've got the ability to run something like Red Hat OpenShift or SUSE Rancher across all of these public clouds and maintain the ability to have infrastructure independence because you made a conscious choice about the Kubernetes orchestration layer. You can do the same thing with stuff like MongoDB and the database you choose. Or you can use GKE and the native embedded service from the cloud provider that will give you the featured version of their Kubernetes deployment. I think there is competition. You've just got to be thoughtful about how you consume these services to make sure that you've got no vendor lock-in. I'm of the opinion that you should use a SUSE Rancher or a Red Hat OpenShift or a Mirantis or whatever it is, independent of the service provided by the cloud provider. Because what's the very value of Kubernetes? It's the ability to pick your container up and put it somewhere else. If you're doing that with an AWS, a Microsoft, or a Google Kubernetes service, will you be able to pick those containers up and run them on another cloud, run them on-prem? So I think obviously there's a natural intention from these cloud providers to lock you in, but I think that smart enterprise architects are thinking through some of those lock-in points, and there's the ability for things like OpenShift and Rancher to give you self-control. So I think is this a market operating the way it should, going back right to the top, Alan, around oligopolies and monopolies and all of those anti-competitive type of words that would trigger an FTC type investigation? I think this is just markets operating in the way they should. You've got 3 or 4 big players duking it out. Over the weekend, there was discussion on X about whether Meta should get into offering a public cloud service. There's not much barrier to entry for them to get into that market. Could Apple do this for an iOS developer ecosystem? Absolutely. So is there barriers to entry? Is the market operating in the way it should? I think so.
Yeah, I do think that the market, this is markets doing market stuff. And frankly, I like it. I like the fact that, as you say, we can use OpenShift and Kubernetes and Rancher to build truly cross-domain, cross-location, portable applications. That's what I do personally. I literally have part of my applications running literally in this building and part of them running on Akamai and part of them running in Cloudflare. And it all works great. And I could certainly have AWS participate in that. Or I could say, you know what? AWS has incredibly attractive value-added services, and I want to bet my business on those, and I'm going to go in that direction. And it really is up to the customer. I think the fact that 2/3 of cloud workloads have chosen the oligopoly means the oligopoly is doing it right.
Yeah, they're innovating and adding value to clients, which is what they should do.
I've got a white picket fence I need painted. But look, I call bullshit on the whole oligopoly thing. Yes, today we have 3 major ones, but quite frankly, Steven Dickens. As if you've said on past gangs, if you take the Office 365 and Google Workplace out, Oracle is not that far behind those 3. We've mentioned the 2 big Chinese ones. Stephen Foskett, you mentioned 2 up-and-coming ones that I think people have to look at, Akamai and Cloudflare. By the way, we're going to be doing a video series with our friends at Cloudflare on that very subject of the Cloudflare I forgot what their tagline is around their cloud. And that'll be a regular bi-weekly here on Techstrong TV. But we're early, as Steve Dickens says, we're early still in the cloud adoption phases. Having 3 is a hell of a lot better than we did in desktops.
True. I think we're also overlooking the nature of the licensing agreements that people sign with these companies willingly. And if I have to deliver X amount of workloads to qualify for my discounts, then I'm going to drive developers in the organization to consume Microsoft or Google or AWS to a certain level because I want that discount rate to kick in.
Yeah. Look, there are risks and rewards. I want to end this block by saying this. We're still early in this game.
Mm-hmm.
And now, in the words of Vito Corleone, our true enemy has not yet shown himself. Well, maybe it was Michael Corleone.
We don't know how big this oligarchy is going to get either.
We don't know. It's an oligopoly, not an oligarchy. But anyway, enough of the olios. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We're coming back. IBM recently announced earnings. Steven Dickens has some key insights, and he's going to share it with you. Up next on Techstrong Gang.
All right, we're back and we're talking about IBM and its recent earnings report, which showed some positive momentum. And that's not always been the case with IBM because they're kind of, at least in my perception, there's a lot of ups and downs with IBM over the years. Mr. Dickens, where are we at this cycle with IBM?
So I think we're starting to get to the point where Arvind's got the organization into a groove. Just to go by the numbers, total revenue 15.8 billion. Up 2% year over year. Software revenue up 7%. Infrastructure was up. So some softness on the consulting side. I think if I look at the sort of perspective here, IBM's got a really strong, very focused strategy, hybrid cloud and AI. Arvind's led the charge with the hybrid cloud piece. He was instrumental and led the efforts when Ginny Rometty was still the CEO. He's driven the Red Hat acquisition and driven that across the entire organization. They've announced their intention to acquire HashiCorp, which will give them more in that space. So I think they're doubling down. I am seeing a slowing in growth of Red Hat. That used to be at 20%. That's now at 7% in the last earnings. So kind of some questions there. I think when you look at the core infrastructure business, Rick Lewis is doing a fantastic job overall as the SVP for that business. Specifically, Ross Morey's business from a mainframe point of view. Normally at this point in the mainframe cycle, they're talking about the cyclical nature of that product cycle, and they're posting numbers that were down. That business unit was up 8%. I'm talking to Ross Morey, the GM, about how he's managing to pull that off this late in the cycle this week, but frankly, still a performance. So I think work to do here in my research note. I think IBM, if it wants its stock to rip, has probably got to do some more work on a reduction in force in its workforce. I think if they were to make a 15-20% trim, we'd see that stock rip. This isn't stock advice or organizational advice, certainly for Arvind. But I think IBM returning to consistent quarter-over-quarter growth, really positive.
15 to 20% is a huge riff. And
well, you could argue, Alan, that they're fat. I mean, I spent 10 years there. Have they taken the same sort of medicine that Silicon Valley has taken over the last 12 months? Probably not.
Well, let me ask you this, because historically, IBM has always been wrapped around that mainframe much more than they like to admit. And, they kind of hide some of those numbers because suddenly, some group that sells something that attaches to the mainframe is doing really well when there's a next upgrade cycle of the mainframe, but that gets counted elsewhere. How dependent is IBM still on that mainframe platform?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways they measure that. The short stack revenue, which is the hardware, the software, and the support services that are directly around it. And then there's long stack, which is all the other things that get dragged. IBM's transaction software business has got a lot of kicks and DB2 in it. I think the street knows that now. But there's a lot of transparency around their OpenShift numbers and their Red Hat numbers. There's transparency around their AI numbers and what they're doing in Watson X. So I think the street knows where the mainframe is buried in the IBM numbers overall now. I think IBM continues to do a great job with the mainframe, but I think its role in the overall mixture of their numbers is well understood and it's probably not as big as it used to be.
No, yeah, but it's still sizable. I mean, and for good reason.
I probably know what it is, but probably shouldn't say that I know what it is. Let's leave it at that.
Okay, let's not get ourselves in trouble. But, Stephen, you mentioned it, but you focused more on the other side of it, which was the infrastructure, AI. Right? Mm-hmm. They're making a big bet here on AI. There was an article recently over in DevOps.com on this, AI platform for DevOps. I mean, look, when you think about it, when AI first burst on the scene in November, it'll be 2 years now, right? To me, I was like, well, what's different than Watson, right? Watson was AI for me at first. So you would think IBM is going to be a player. And if you believe this whole Gen AI market is for real and it's not just all hype, I think there's a huge play there for IBM, which could really, it could be bigger than the infrastructure piece when all is said and done.
I don't know, Stephen Foskett. You've been around with me a long time. Every time I look back in history, there's all these examples of IBM pioneering something that somebody else benefited from, whether it was a relational database or OS2 platform. So will AI be any different?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Because IBM has really these fantastic Granite LLMs that they've open sourced. Kudos to IBM for putting all this development effort into competitive LLMs in a variety of sizes. I think I should point out too that they've got LLMs that can be used by enterprises for small language tasks or large language tasks on a variety of different hardware that don't have to have anything to do with IBM. They've also got this, this capability to experiment on those using what are they calling it? The concert or the framework that you wrote about on DevOps.
Instruct Labs, Steve.
Instruct Labs. Thank you, Stephen. I knew you'd remember it. And that's really cool stuff. But then they also have Watson X, and they've been pushing that. This is not really about IBM, but I wonder, as many have said, there's no moat around LLMs, and there's no moat around AI. If you look at the incredible, so Granite is incredible. Thank you, IBM. Llama is incredible. Claude is incredible. There are open source LLMs or open LLMs that you can use out there. But does that benefit IBM? How does that benefit IBM ultimately? I wonder if this is really going to help IBM to be a major AI player, or if it's going to be a case of IBM thankfully donating incredible technology that we're going to take in our own direction. How does this dynamic play out?
Well, it's interesting for me. I think if I'm a bank, if I'm a telco, if I'm a retailer, do I need a grown-up in the room to be able to guide and steer my AI strategy? I see you nodding there, Alan. Yes. Yep. IBM, from a consulting point of view, some of what it's doing with attestation and being able to certify and validate some of these models. What was the training data? And put some of those assurances and guarantees in place. We just talked about the ability to fine-tune models. Do you want to be in a locked-in NVIDIA CUDA model where you've got one vendor and you're locked in? Do you want to be thinking about something like InstructLab that's IBM's open source? People should be thinking about some of the control points in their AI stack. I think if I was a CIO or a CTO of a large enterprise, I'd certainly get IBM in. I'd certainly be looking at a consulting engagement. I'd certainly be sitting down with those guys and saying, as all these fancy vendors come with the latest whiz-bang gadget, can you just be the grown-up in the room here for me and help me with map this out from a deployment perspective?
Speaking of grown-ups in the room, Bonnie.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I just wanted to point out some interesting things about Q2 for IBM because they introduced a series of sustainability-related products and services that they hadn't had before. For example, in March of 2024, they introduced IT overall operations assessment. So how is your IT team being more efficient and overall operations? They also took a look at end of life for hardware. How is your team handling it? We can help you with that. And then most recently, which I think is really interesting because it's so recent, in May of 2024, they introduced several ESG related AI infused services and products that will take a look at different companies' ESG carbon reporting and enhanced assessments with that. And also leaning into Watson, which I remember because I used to work at weather.com, which was part of when they owned that asset. They take a look at climate risk as well as with geolocation data, and that's a new service, and that is all part of their AI effort. So these are all new things that happened in Q2 that I think affected the July earnings report.
I hope so. I just quick word on this. Stephen, you mentioned it in passing, but I think it bears further discussion. That is the sick man of IBM, Red Hat, right? It took, how long ago did they buy it? 3-4 years ago now?
2019.
5 years. It took them this long to beat the life out of it. I mean, you talk to the Red Hat people, you see the Red Hat people, it shows. They don't have that cocky, I'm Red Hat, we are the open source company anymore. They're now Red Hat part of IBM. And I think, quite frankly, their growth is reflected in it, unfortunately.
Stephen, either one of you, actually.
You need to be more specific than that, Mike.
Stephen D., do you think adult supervision from IBM is too expensive because it seems to be only consumed in these very, very large enterprises?
But that's their base.
I know that's their base, but they could be broader.
These guys so Apple sells to a billion of the richest people in the world and the wealthy, and it doesn't offer low-price phones in India. IBM's consulting business is exactly the same. IBM's enterprise business, they're focused in on that Fortune 5,000, the biggest names, their penetration in Citibank, Wells Fargo, Barclays, Vodafone. Go across and pick the FTSE 100, the Fortune 500, the top 100 names in France and Germany and Singapore and Australia. That's where IBM's focused. They're not a startup player. They're not trying to build. Yes, you can buy services from IBM Cloud. And yes, there's some IBM storage and there may be some Red Hat and but if you look at IBM's go-to-market model, it is focused on the biggest names. So you've got to sort of parse out where they want to be and how they structure themselves. They're not trying to go out and run a startup program to compete with AWS in Portugal to win IaaS revenue out of 200 startups in Portugal. It's just not there. And they don't want to be there.
Red Hat is. That was Red Hat's business. That's the disconnect right there. Anyway, we're going to disconnect here for a second. We're going to take a break on Techstrong Gang. Got me talking banks. We're going to come back and talk about Web 5. About Web 4, you say? Web 3? I don't know. We're going to be back in a second. You're watching Techstrong Gang.
Cloud Native Now is the web's leading resource for the growing cloud native ecosystem. CloudNativeNow.com is your destination for news, thought leadership, features, and webinars on cloud native architecture, Kubernetes, serverless, cloud native application development, microservices, service mesh, cloud native security, and more. Stay on the cutting edge of modern application development at Cloud Native Now.
All right, we're back and we're talking about Web 5. And to Alan's point, well, it turns out there is no Web 4. We went from Web 3 to Web 5.
Who makes these choices?
I think Jack Dorsey made the choice on Web 5, I think.
Really?
Right?
Okay.
If I understand how this all plays out a little bit. But the basic idea here is that we're going to have a decentralized internet with blockchain kind of at its core, with a lot of identity management capabilities baked in, so it'll be more secure. Stephen, is there a market here just yet? I mean, it seems like a lovely idea and maybe where we're headed, but to Alan's point, nobody knows what Web 5 is.
Well, yeah, and to be very clear, let's all get this out right there. There's two different Web 3s, and whatever it is, it probably ain't what you think it is. I'm with Tim Berners-Lee here on saying basically, forget it. What all that blockchain blah blah Web 3 that you heard about, that ain't what we were trying to do. And Web 4, I think we did kind of skip Web 4, honestly. I mean, what even is that? But let's set this aside. First off, Web 5, whatever Web 5 is trying to be, let's go to actually what the announcement is that we're linking to here from Cloud Native Now. So you can now have decentralized web nodes on Google Cloud. So what the heck is a decentralized web node? What the heck is a DID? Let's talk about it a little bit. So first off, this is not a bunch of blockchain hoo-ha like you probably heard about Web 3. This is actually kind of a useful thing. A decentralized web node is part of the ability to create a decentralized identity. Essentially, that you all of your identity information would be stored in essentially like a portable web server of your own that would have access controls and credentials and would give you the ability to have sort of a digital identity that lives in the cloud, not on blockchain, and that would allow you to grant or deny access to that identity information and personal information on demand for use by new applications. It's not a pie in the sky thing. It's not blockchain. And it is a way to give the power back from social media companies. So what the web is now, I mean, exemplified by login with Google or, iCloud everywhere, that's good in that it allows you to have a centralized identity source and a centralized control of your information, but it's centralized in the hands of a company. The idea with the DIF, which is part of the Linux Foundation, again, real deal nerds here, not crypto bros, is that it would allow you to have that same kind of identity source that you might get, let's say, from iCloud, and yet own it yourself and have it be run there. This is all really, forward-looking, futuristic stuff, but it's not crazy. One of the people behind this is Solid, which is Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the web. So this, again, no crypto bros here. I wish they hadn't called it Web 5.
So I've got to dive in. I mean, you're taking the anti-blockchain view.
Yeah,
I'm gonna do. So let's get some delineation. Cryptocurrency is one use case of blockchain technology. There is hundreds of other use cases of blockchain and digital ledger, distributed ledger technology that has got nothing to do with cryptocurrency. So let's get that fact out there. So when you say,
let's stop there for a second, Stephen.
When you say crypto bros,
you're not talking blockchain. But Steven Dickens, I agree with you 100%, 1,000%. The problem is perception is reality. And for too many people, even savvy people who watch this, tech people, it's gotten too, I don't know how you decouple them.
Well, first off, you've got to do the work. First off, you've got to go and understand this space. So we did a podcast with Broadcom where we had the lady who runs the blockchain efforts for EY. We'll find a link and we'll put that in the show notes. She's talking about the work that's going on, serious work around using DLT and blockchain technology to underpin financial markets, underpin custody of digital assets. You can see things around artwork. You can talk about fractional ownership of real estate. There is 100 different use cases that have got nothing to do with cryptocurrency. And to throw that entire set of work under the bus because some crypto bro is trying to pump and dump some altcoin is just disingenuous to a bunch of serious people doing serious work. Let's get that said. So, Steve, you and I are going to have a conversation in a bar at some point in the future.
Well, let me jump in there on that one, Stephen, because it's going to surprise you, but I'm going to defend you on this one. You're absolutely right. Blockchain is a technology that can be useful. The problem is that the problem set best addressed by blockchain is much smaller than the problem set that and I'm calling them crypto bros on purpose, have tried to address with blockchain. And unfortunately, one of the good problem sets, decentralized currency, has been completely ruined by a bunch of profit-motivated, dishonest
crypto
jerks,
bros,
basically. Now, I should
point out the other side of that, though. We're coming out the other side of that. I mean, we're talking about a market that, 10, 12 years old? Yes, you go back to sort of the all of the nefarious stuff that happened in 2017, 2018. Yeah. We've got ETFs now that have been approved. The ETH ETF was approved, was it last week or the week before? We've now got 11 companies providing ETFs based around Bitcoin, spot Bitcoin. So I think we're at a point in maturity now that we weren't at. Lots.
Until someone else gets arrested.
Right.
Alan, we got to stop it with comments like that. We had two presidential candidates talk at a Bitcoin conference this weekend.
Yeah, let's separate here for a minute. All right. So the crypto bros and all that stuff, push it aside. There are these technologies that were created around these blockchain technologies that are going to be repurposed into things like, Web 5 might be an example, but I think we need to distinguish between the technologies and a single use case. And yes, there's a bunch of knuckleheads running around.
I mean, with all due respect, you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth and say, I want to talk about blockchain independent of cryptocurrency and then talk about a Bitcoin conference, right? Because that defeats what you're trying to do, which is separate blockchain from cryptocurrency.
Or maybe we should call these technologies something other than blockchain technologies and call them something
Absolutely.
different.
I think it's
something like DLT.
Yeah, it might be that they are peer-to-peer technologies in my mind. And as Stephen described in his use case, that's what gives you control over your data. And we've been having this argument for 15, 20 years now, and I wish we would get to this point.
So here's what I don't understand. What's the difference between and Stephen with a PH, I know you tried to explain, but the difference between Web 3 blockchain stuff and Web 5.
5 has a little more identity controls baked into it as far as I can tell. But Stephen Foskett, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's get brass tacks here. So, like I said, what I was trying to do in my introduction is differentiate this from the hoo-ha nonsense and say,
this is a family-friendly show, Stephen. Easy with the hoo-ha.
I'm sorry, hoo-ha. I apologize. I apologize for the sensitive ears. Trying to differentiate from that and what people think of like Web3 and because Web3 was really blockchain. It was like let's blockchain all the things. This thing that's being talked about here, and I don't want to call it Web5 because I hate that name, but the idea of decentralized web nodes is real technology. And guess what? There is the potential to use a peer-to-peer transaction technology, a peer-to-peer way of communicating this that uses, yes, a blockchain. But I don't want people to be saying, decentralized web nodes and decentralized identity is just another, let's put everything on the blockchain. It really isn't. This uses web standards. It uses REST. It uses a lot of the same things that we build the semantic web on in Web 3.0, not the blockchain Web 3, to do something practical for real people. And so I think that actually if Stephen and I had this discussion in a bar around this specific technology, I think both of us would be nodding vigorously, because using a blockchain as a way to handle one corner of this problem, which is how do I guarantee that my data has integrity and is distributed in a decentralized peer-to-peer way that doesn't require a central authority to decide. Blockchain makes perfect sense for that. And that's when we should use blockchain. It's just this isn't just blockchain. This is a whole world of things, including a one element that uses blockchain.
Stephen, we've been on decentralized domains for 5 or 6 years. You can go and buy your own. So if you want to go and get a web domain, and you know this, Alan, having done such great work with Security Bottled Hard and DevOps.com, and every time you've bought a domain that you've then grown into a juggernaut, you go to a GoDaddy or you go to somebody else and they kind of administer setting up the domain. And what's your ownership of that domain? It can get tenuous. So unstoppable domains have been doing...
Stephen, isn't that it? Unstoppable domains. I have domains on Unstoppable too.
Yeah, that's decentralized Web3.
That's what I thought.
Domain.
So yeah. I guess that's what I'm asking.
So I'm struggling to understand the difference between that, which we've had for 5 or 6 years, Web3 based self-custody, self-ownership of a domain. Nobody can do anything with that domain once you've got it set up. They've done the hard work of unpicking some of the stuff that the centralization of the web had got to. I'm trying to understand, and maybe, Stephen, you're going to send me a cool article and I'm going to be able to understand it, but I'm trying to get the difference between that decentralized Web3 unstoppable domains thought and what we're hearing about here for the first time, for me at least, is Web5.
That's my question too.
And that's exactly it. So solidproject.org, if you go there and you check that out, Stephen, what you're describing is right. True. That is another one of the building blocks of this thing. But what do you do with it? What is the application? This is about a specific application. And that specific application is that you have your personal identity information, your credentials, your personal data stored in a pod that is it is actually built out of components like web servers and blockchain and JSON and domain names and things like that. But that this is the digital you, and it's not just blockchain. It is a practical application that decentralizes identity data in a way that is useful potentially for applications and would get you.
I thought that's what I called it, Unstoppable.
Apple and Google.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand
what he described it Unstoppable, but
I'm trying to understand the gap here. That to me sounds like I'm self-custodying, easy for me to say, self-custodying my personal data in a wallet.
Right. And that's what I thought this was, though. I thought that's what the unstoppable domains were. Anyway, hey, suffice to say, we've got some time yet to talk about this. We'll return to it because I don't think this is real for 3 to 5 years anyway, if ever.
I'm waiting for
Take a while.
Look, let's go to 10. I want Web 10. Anyway, Stephen and Steven, thank you for your contributions and appearing on the gang with us today. You've earned your colors, both of you today, doing great work. Bonnie, it's always great to have you here, my friend. Mike V,
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. We'll be back tomorrow with even more. Probably not any Web 5 stories tomorrow, but we'll be back with some good stuff. I remind you, we have a full lineup of Techstrong TV immediately following the gang today. So do check that out. Don't go anywhere. But until tomorrow, this is Alan Schemmel. Have a great day, everyone.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.